Collateral Banter, episode 79. I'm here joined by Matt Szafranski from Western Mass Politics and Insight. Recording this on November 13th. So I wanted to hear from you how you feel about the election. What do you think happened? And I guess what is still happening right now, because as predicted and not unexpectedly, Donald Trump refuses to concede and refuses to recognize that Joe Biden won. And there are multiple lawsuits across multiple states. What did you make of the election?
And most of those lawsuits are, going to probably amount to diddly squat. Overall, the election, along exactly as I might have anticipated. It was not as good for Democrats as I think people had hoped. I think the thing is that, there's a lot of theories about why this didn't come up in polling, but there was obviously a large number of Republicans that showed up as well that had not necessarily been presumed to show. And I think that explains a lot of the damage that happened and the failure of Democrats to gain as much distance as they thought. Because you got to figure if you take out the 2 to 3 million Trump voters from the totals and the Democrats remain stable, you probably got a Democratic majority in the Senate. At least break even in the House. I mean, it's important to note that the Democrats didn't lose significantly outside of a very large states, which have, both conservative and, Democratic areas within them. They held their gains in blue states for the most part, again, with some exceptions. But there were just so many more Republicans that showed up to vote, so many people that showed up to vote for Donald Trump in particular. I don't think they were necessarily showing up to vote for down ballot Republicans. And as a result, we, ended up with, not the resounding crush on Trump that I think a lot of people were hoping for. On the other hand, you could argue that would it have really mattered? I mean, I think there would have been a lot of push on Democrats the same way because we live in such a distorted information universe and one party has no real policy platform.
Right.
It's just
Here's what happened. When it was announced that he won, I went out and saw the celebrations out here in Western Mass. I was in Northampton checking out the parade of cars driving by honking. And it was a jubilant and happy moment for a lot of people who wanted to see Donald Trump defeated. But I think this is you won the battle, but not the war. I have a strong feeling that Donald Trump's going to, what he represented wasn't refuted the way I would have wanted it to be. And because it wasn't, I think the Republicans feel like, we'll give this another spin. Why not? The Democrats lost, as of right now, November 13th, they lost. The Democrats lost 5 seats in the House of Representatives. They're most likely not going to gain a majority in the Senate. But even if they did, it really matter in terms of pushing legislation. President Biden's going to have to implement his vision through executive orders, meaning there's unless the Republicans in the Senate somehow break with their party and they find, 10, 11 members willing to work with a Democratic president, I don't see the political crisis as being solved just because Donald Trump is out of office. Is my analysis wrong? What do you think about that? Like, what is your take on sort of the broader spectrum of the election?
Well, I think there's 2 different things that are happening here. There's a question of, there's Trumpism and there's Trump. They're not the same thing. And I think that while it is absolutely true that under any circumstances Trumpism has not gone away, I think it is a mistake to assume that Trumpism will be as effective for every Republican in the future. And we saw this in election after election in between 2016 and 2020, where Republicans just, couldn't keep it up. Because, it really is a personality cult that's around Trump. There's a feeling that, from a lot of people, and it's gross, frankly, but that somehow they feel liberated by the fact that there's this guy who's liberated to say whatever the hell he wants, whatever the damage it does, be damned. And these are people that I don't, for all their freedom loving, so to speak, I don't believe they actually have any real idea what blessings that actually entails, in this country. So they don't care or don't realize, it doesn't really matter if they're indifferent or ignorant to it, that what harm that Trump and, frankly, the Republican Party, which goes way, way longer than his ride down the golden escalator, that they're doing to the country. I mean, they're not a functional, center-right party. I mean, you can look at even some of the really awful things conservative parties are doing in other countries, and none of them are behaving as nihilistically as the Republican Party in the United States is. I mean, you can certainly attack, Boris Johnson and conservatives and some of the gross things they do in the United Kingdom, but on a certain level, Johnson understands that if you let people down entirely, they're going to retaliate against you. And in Britain's system, I think they ultimately will. In our system, Republicans feel more insulated from that because culture is. I mean, the culture war is a big part of British politics these days too, but it's still very different from the culture war here. And I think that so the question becomes, how effective is Trumpism without Trump? I mean, one of the scariest things that could happen, I think, to this country would be as if it elected somebody like Tom Cotton or Josh Hawley.
That's who it is. That's right there. I don't mean to interrupt. You. But I have a very strong feeling that somebody like a Tom Cotton will run in 2024 or 2028 and copy. They will run if they win the nomination, the Republican nomination. I think they can. He's going to have to copy some of Trump's tactics and style, try to capture the social media, and he will come hard against the left in this cultural war. And Tom Cotton has already, kind of talking about the 1619 Project. And I don't know if a lot of people listening actually understand that, but Google it. A lot has been written about it on all sides, but he's taken a stance about it. And so I know about this because he's tried to propose legislation to cut off funding to any high school that would discuss this project that he sees as completely revisionist history and making up American history. The political class adapt to the changing environment. And so I don't think Trump is a shoo-in. I think he's the front runner and likely to be the candidate in 2024 if he wants to be. But I think you're absolutely right. It could be Hawley. It could be Cotton. Somebody to combine Trump's media circus with political understanding and political expertise and fuse that together. And to me, that's the moment where I am maybe even more afraid than Trump. And I feel like maybe you agree with me there. What do you think? Is that the real moment of a test for the country? And I wanted to add this in your response. I got an email from Matt Taibbi, a journalist formerly with Rolling Stones. I don't know if he's still with them. He sent out an email where he talked about the percentage of people who are not white who increased their support for Donald Trump. If I could just give you a couple here. Black women went from 4% to 8%, black men from 13 to 18%. Latino vote also went up. Trump's LGBTQ community support went up from 14 to 28%. White women went up from 53 to 55%. I'm looking at the email right now. I know the Latino vote, and I can't quite find what it was, but the Latino vote, I don't know if he did worse or better, but he did better than in 2016. Is that a place of concern for the Democratic Party? That after 4 years of Trump as well? So,
yes, but also maybe. So what I mean by that is that this was an unprecedented election. I mean, in two ways. One is that Trump was on the ballot, which might not sound that unprecedented because it happened in 2016, but it happened with him as an incumbent. That hadn't happened before. And the other thing is that we had the pandemic. Voting was, hilariously easy, and people had time. I mean, let me rephrase that. It wasn't as easy as it should be, and it was arduous in ways that it shouldn't be, but it was easier than it's been in a long time. There was no excuse not to vote. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
And also people had a lot of time on their hands. So I think that those conditions, God willing, will not be with us in 2024. Or if Trump is on the ballot again, it'll be hard to know. I mean, we don't know what the conditions are going to be in the universe when, is Joe Biden even going to be the nominee on the Democratic side? I think that it's very hard to know how much of this data is going to be predictive. And let's not also forget that 8 years ago, Obama was running away with states like Ohio and Iowa. And then 4 years later, it all went to hell. I mean, in a way, the president that launched a lot of this, resentment that is, bedeviling us so much, he didn't do it intentionally, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Was also the one that was able to wrangle more people to believe that he was really on their side. You know what I mean? Yeah. So I mean, it's like I don't know how much we can say about this data is predictive or even accurate. And I don't want to be a Pollyanna. I'm just saying that I don't know what to make of it yet.
Yeah, I agree. But here's the point. You had a percentage of people in 2016 voting for Donald Trump. You see 4 years of governance of Donald Trump, and he increases his margin across all those groups that I listed. Pretty much, except the only group, according to a friend of mine who showed me a map of all the increases from 2016, except for white men, the traditional Republican base, that went down for Donald Trump by about 5%. And I could be wrong about that, but here's my concern. Okay, it doesn't mean that the Republican Party is going to get 50% African American or Latino vote, but they don't need that, I guess is my point. They don't need 50% of that plus their original coalition of all of that. I'm just asking, is it a concern for the Democratic Party that you had 4 years of Trump and still he saw increase? He didn't see decreases. I guess that's my question.
Well, I mean, I think that the only stat that I think matters to prove your point in the sense that, yes, it is troubling, is that he got so many millions more votes this time than last time, even though he was losing. He is now will go down in history as the candidate with it's a faulty statistic because the country is always growing. It would go down in history as this person with the second most number of votes as of 2020, So, I mean, that in and of itself is disturbing. I think that where the numbers come from within the electorate itself are almost beside the point. You're right. After 4 years of this mess and 9 months of a completely mangled response to this pandemic, there were a number of people that were like, more please. I think part of it is, a failure to completely adjust and calibrate for some of the misinformation that is flooding the internet. Everybody hates Facebook. Unfortunately, not enough of everybody. To say nothing of less significant but certainly important disseminators of misinformation like YouTube. And I think that, that's one part of the equation, and it's still never been clear how you nip that in the bud. Yeah. But again, going back to the original point, I mean, yes, I'm deathly afraid of Tom Cotton as president. I mean, I remember thinking in 2016 the only good thing about Donald Trump winning would be that Tom Cotton wouldn't be running in 2020, And at the same time, and I don't want to, and I'm using the P word a lot here, I don't want to be a Pollyanna about anything. Tom Cotton is not Donald Trump.
Right.
He is, I remember reading a New Yorker profile of him, and the impression I got is that he's dull as dishwater. The man has about as much charisma as a rotten banana. And I think that that's certainly possibly true. And if it is, that's a problem for Republicans because, I think there's an attempt by political watchers like ourselves to sometimes look at Donald Trump as, primarily a political figure. And in fact, he's primarily a cultural figure who happened to run for office.
Right. I totally agree with that.
And compare that to Obama, who was primarily a political figure who became a cultural figure. Right. I don't think any other president has really been like that since Ronald Reagan, and before him, probably not, before him, JFK and then FDR, and that's pretty much it. Like nobody else has been such a part of the culture in the way that, by virtue of being president. But Donald Trump was a cultural figure. And it was the Apprentice which seemed to, further the idea that he was actually a good businessman, and that informs the notion that he was good on the economy and all kinds of other
thing. If I could just quickly interrupt, I saw something that said that those who voted with the economy in mind, 80% went for Donald Trump, as if like Donald Trump was the right man to rebuild the economy. He has captured the economy. He has captured the economy vote, and that terrifies me. But go ahead. I'm sorry.
On the one hand, it's funny, like I see a lot of these lefties on Twitter like, well, the Democrats should have done this. They should have focused on Trump's corruption. It's like, I don't think it would have mattered. 60% of voters never would have seen any of that stuff.
He's a low figure. It'd be much higher than that.
Exactly. Any arguments and that's the other thing too, is that because Trump is such an overwhelming figure, like any attempt to pull him apart, with any type of PR offensive, I think is foolish. I mean, let's be honest. I mean, I want to give Joe Biden's campaign a lot of credit. They did everything almost perfectly, but I think it is fair to say that Donald Trump lost this election as much as Joe Biden might have won it. And that's because for enough people, they didn't want more pleas. But that kind of goes to the point of how could any candidate have possibly overwhelmed, the nonsense that comes out of it. And the same thing is true of Democrats in the House or Senate in terms of trying to, you could never get loud enough without becoming him, at which point you've lost, in my opinion.
Right. Well, Marco Rubio tried back in 2016, if you remember that. Marco Rubio tried when he started talking about his size of his hands. You know what they say about man with small hands, which, by the way, for the record, we are obviously can call that ridiculous, those who follow politics. However, that is the week where Marco Rubio and Donald Trump got the same amount of attention in the mainstream media. So I just want to add that.
But it didn't help Marco Rubio do any better in the polls. That's the problem.
Well, he didn't continue down that route, and then he sort of apologized and came back. Maybe he needed to, but I'm not advising Marco Rubio. I'm just throwing that out.
Exactly. And that actually brings up another issue, which is after the economy, it's people who are, well, hey, we're both dudes. We can tear down our gender, And I mean, I think do women to a certain degree feel the same way as too many men do, but they feel like this faux masculinity is, reaffirming in some way, as if it's really killing them that they can't, treat people like crap, as a way to make up for whatever is missing in their lives. I got a lot missing in my life too, and I like to think I don't do that kind of stuff, people,
Yeah.
And but that is another element, like after. And that's where the culture war stuff comes in.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And it's big.
That's all that's a part of. And as I said, I don't know, I'm not counting my chickens before I hatch, but I don't know that somebody like Tom Cotton or Josh Hawley, who are almost like, the perfect distillation of the very elites that the Republican base hates, are going to be able to do that. I mean, how many people think about the fact that Donald Trump went to an Ivy League school? Probably none at all, because he doesn't sound like he does.
Right. Yeah.
So the fact that
I love the poorly educated. I just want to let you know that.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Just because he sounds like well, I mean, he didn't actually always sound like this. I don't know if it's tactical or neurological, but his speech patterns are not what they were 30 years ago. That was nobody ever. Donald Trump was able to somehow. I mean, even though he was an elite, like as I think Fran Lebowitz once said, he's a poor man's idea of what a rich man is. Mm-hmm. So, but he wasn't an elite in anybody's mind. It's going to be difficult for Republicans to replicate this situation without Trump. But even without Trump, even if elections can be won by Democrats in the future, at critical junctures, that doesn't mean that Trumpism still isn't an insidious disease that will be distorting everything.
Sure.
Foreseeable future.
Yeah, I think so. I actually look around the world and I think of places like, and a lot of people tell me I shouldn't do this because the countries abroad have different histories, different cultures, blah, 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 so you shouldn't make comparison. But the phenomenon that has gripped the Republican Party is very much the same conditions from my point of view of what's going on in Hungary and Poland. It's the same cultural war. And yes, Western Europe is a much stronger liberal democracy perhaps than the United States. And you can look at the data yourself and you can see that actually the countries with the strongest civil liberties, the most effective governments was never the United States. They always ranked towards the bottom of the elite countries. Countries like Norway, Sweden, Denmark always ranked the highest. Finland. These are the countries that across the board tend to rank as number one. So, it's not surprising that a country kind of lowered down the scale. Here I'm talking about like agencies like Freedom House and others that actually measure democracies that I've been following. But, the same conditions that are happening in the United States is a battle that is going on right now in Hungary. And there, the conservative government has taken over the government and rewritten the Constitution. So they got to rewrite all the electoral rules. He got to muzzle the media. He got to manipulate the business interests, meaning he can open up an investigation unless you sell your business to one of his cronies, right? Like it is a full-scale illiberal democracy is what they call it. And this phenomenon fascinates me because it started in 2010 in Hungary with the rejection of the elites. It's quickly spread to Poland, and then I think now it's in the Czech Republic. There are many countries in eastern part of Europe that are already dealing with this, and it's, and we fought this battle in 2016, and they won for 4 years, but the United States isn't Hungary. Trump didn't get to rewrite the whole Constitution as much as I think he probably would have. And now here in the United States, they lost, even with the Electoral College sort of favoring the more conservative candidates. And so, a Democrat will now take over, and that has global implications because of U.S. power. You see it today. You were talking about Britain earlier. One of the aides to Boris Johnson, Cummings, who is in this sort of alt-right, far-right sort of mold, who's been advising him, is now out. He's out. And it's sort of the conservative party is saying, look, you got to go and start moving some of these fringe elements out. And clearly this is because of the win of Joe Biden and the rejection of Donald Trump. It has implications because the power relations are different. I am not at all saying that what's going on in Hungary and Poland is exactly the United States. Because what's going on in Hungary and Poland is different just between those two countries, even though, they're both in Eastern Europe. So I get there are differences here. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, just briefly on that, I was listening to Ezra Klein's podcast recently. He had Ann Applebaum on, who's a columnist. She is married to a Polish politician. And she was saying how what she's seeing in the United States is very similar to what's happening in Eastern Europe. I think the key difference is that our political systems are so much different. We're not parliamentary. I mean,
Right.
Poland has a president, but it's primarily a parliamentary system.
Yes.
And we have so many veto points in our system that it would be very hard for Republicans to do the same thing. I mean, starting with the fact that they would never have the votes to amend the Constitution the way that, the Poles and Hungarians have tried to do in various ways.
Yeah.
But I think there is actually a connection there in that there's this malaise among conservative elites in these countries who seem to think that the direction that everybody's going in is some kind of existential threat. It's not. Nobody's
Right.
stopping people in the heartland of America from going to church.
Right.
But the mere fact that they might have to, if they own a business that's open to anybody, that they can't fire somebody who's gay is somehow a terrible affront to them.
Yeah. I did want to bring up a related topic to our discussion about presidential elections. Many things happened statewide, and I wanted to bring this up because I wanted to ask you a little bit about identities of the Democratic and Republican Party and what you think they represent today. And this, again, I'm going back to a Matt Taibbi email that I saw. He posted a tweet by, you mentioned, Josh Hawley, who said in the tweet on November 4th, "We are a working class party now. That's the future." And in it, he talks about how Florida voted to increase the minimum wage, a state that Donald Trump won. And many, I would going to assume this, and I think it's pretty safe, many who voted for Donald Trump likely voted yes to increase the minimum wage. Okay? So if we can take that, if we agree on that, then we look at California, which has, I think, to this global audience who listens to this podcast and in America, it's got a pretty liberal reputation, Hollywood, all of the political elites that come out of California, pretty liberal people. The people of California voted against the vote to allow Lyft and Uber drivers. They could have voted to force the companies to actually say that the people who are driving their cars would be actual employees and not contractors. And that was voted down by California, not by much. It was 52%, I believe, that said, no, you can keep them as contractors. And here's the discussion I heard in the business press. They said now that that's been voted down in California, that there's a ripple effect across this, that maybe in the future businesses will stop hiring employees and start creating contracts to circumvent the minimum labor laws that we have here in the United States. So my question to you in all of this, I'm talking about this, tweet and Florida and what happened in California, is there anything to the discussion that the Republicans now are, quote unquote, more of a working class party, which is bizarre to me, but and the Democrats are somehow a upper middle class, bourgeois, professional class of college educated individuals that kind of look down and scoff at the, again, I'm going to quote Donald Trump, the poorly educated. What do you think?
There's no denying the fact that there is a larger bourgeois element to the Democratic Party than there probably has been since the 30s, or maybe 40s. But at the same time, I think it is absurd if Josh Hawley, really thinks they're a working class party, then he can sponsor an increase in the minimum wage nationwide. I don't think he's done it. The fact that their voters are voting for voting for policies that are diametrically opposed to the politicians they're actually voting for does not make them a working class party. Second,
right.
If we want to define a working class party as only people that are white, then sure, maybe they are that. But let's be honest here. The working class did not overwhelmingly vote for Republicans, and those that were not white overwhelmingly voted for Democrats across the country, including even in many red states. The difference is, and even as far as that goes, even among white working class voters, they did not so uniformly go toward Republicans either. The Republican base, even under Trump, remains white people of a certain degree of means. Mm-hmm. Now, they may not be college educated, mm-hmm. but that doesn't necessarily mean that they are poor either, or working class, or living hand to mouth.
Sure. Because that statistic of $77,000 is the average income for a Donald Trump supporter?
Yeah, exactly. That's not exactly what I would consider working class by any stretch of the imagination. I don't even think it's working class in Manhattan, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
So what Hawley's saying here is, what Hawley is saying is he's trying to say we are the party of anti-elites without saying it that way. Because even though that might be the way that a lot of their voters are in effect voting, they're not. But very few people are verbalizing, well, I'm an anti-elite voter. Some of them are certainly like, well, I want people that are going to smash things up. And this goes back to the problem of, can anybody be like Donald Trump? How could somebody like Josh Hawley credibly say, I'm going to smash everything up, without some people kind of like, raising an eyebrow, And so, there's a lot of, crosstalk and nonsense that they're perpetuating in this conversation. For the sole purpose of trying to make an argument that isn't really there. And again, you have to look at the motives of somebody like Hawley skeptically.
Yeah. Sure. No, I totally agree. I'm concerned. Here's what I think my overarching concern is in both what we're talking about going on in the presidency and within the political party, that the Republican Party, despite the policies they're implementing, they've begun to change the discourse, the political discourse and the cultural discourse, that this is a party out of touch with the American people, despite them favoring the billionaire class and all of that stuff. What they're almost trying to do is convince the working class that, in fact, they represent their values and their ideas and their policies, and they've been able to grab that working class idea and say, we're the anti-elite. It is the liberal elite who are destroying you, who are keeping you down, who are oppressing you, and giving it to all of these non-deserving people outside this country. Or, I'm sorry, not outside this country, these foreigners. These people who don't live here, who aren't from here, who are taking stuff away. So now they've been able to combine this idea. Again, it's an idea that they're selling, that they represent the working class of America, and fusing it with the interest of their billionaire corporate donors. Now, their argument would be, yes, we do have corporate owners. Yes, we do give a lot of money and support to the billionaire class, but they're going to counter and say so do the Democrats. The Democrats, on the other hand, aren't supporting the working class of Americans. They support the college-educated who are, being brainwashed by their liberal communist professors and all of this stuff, right? Whereas for the Republican side is, hey, we're giving you a chance to join that billionaire class, with these amazing policies that we're doing. They're trying to recreate the reality that they're so out of touch and that they're in the pocket of the oligarchy and the establishment by saying, no, we're not the establishment. The Democrats are the establishment. And look, they're representing these liberal voices that really hate America and hate Americans. It's a strategy that here's my concern. It's working despite the election. It is working. And my concern is, and I'm not worried about 2024 because, Jesus, we could be recording this in 2024 at the beginning of the year, and I still wouldn't know or make predictions about what is happening. But I'm concerned that while the American people did elect Joe Biden, and he will govern for 4 years. I think it's safe to say that right now, despite what is being said in the Republican Party or the big meeting they'll have tomorrow or the march they'll have on Washington, D.C. It concerns me of how everybody in America will process all of these conversations and how the Republican Party will try to market itself in 4 years as this fight for the American people and the American society, because as they do this and they feel like they're losing power culturally, economically, really on the ground, they're going to do their best to become an autocratic and authoritarian party. And we saw the beginnings of this during Donald Trump. But there's an element going on in that party that realizes that 10, 20 years from now, we're going to lose our standing and our cultural hegemony, our cultural power over the country. And we have lost it already. That was what the election of Barack Obama did to them. And that's my concern, is that you're seeing a reaction within the Republican Party that is beyond the norms of democratic discourse, legitimate democratic discourse that doesn't involve, that's my enemy. I'd rather be with Putin than a Democrat type of deal. If this element continues and isn't somehow reduced or contained, I'm terrified of what could happen to American democracy. But what do you think more broadly about the Republican Party trying to shape its identity as a working class anti-establishment party?
I don't think anything that Josh Hawley is saying is going to have anything to do with it, because, again, they're not supporting any policies that are actually beneficial. I mean, maybe some of the trade stuff, even though, it doesn't actually work in a literal sense. None of Trump's trade policy, even if it was competently executed, would have really had the result that people wanted. Because it's automation more than trade.
Right. That's definitely true. Like you said, a lot of these policies don't matter. But I think a lot of voters don't get policy. They get identity. They get politics.
That's why I think that, to a certain extent, if the transformation has already happened, because they've already decided to launch this culture war.
Right.
And so so you're right. They're saying they don't represent your values. That's exactly what they're saying, and that's exactly what they've convinced these voters of. And as I said, I don't think it has anything to do with what Hawley is arguing. I tend to see Hawley as being, a construction of his own mind. Somebody who's truly impressed with themselves. Talk about a swell. The Cotton is so much more dangerous in my mind, is because Cotton's talking about things that are actually authoritarian.
Yes. But no, do you want to tell the audience, what did he write at the New York Times? He wrote an op-ed piece.
He basically wrote an op-ed saying that we should send troops into the street to end, Black Lives Matter protests. Now, to be fair, it was not, and please don't hate me for saying this phrase, he was not actually saying that we should just smite dissent. What he was doing was he was equating the protests generally with the looting that was happening. The problem with that is not, because I don't even think he has the balls to say, well, if you're protesting, we're going to take you down. Right. Even though I think that would be very popular with the base as well, because I think far fewer Americans value protests than we would like to think they do.
Sure.
Can I add something really quick to that? Donald Trump just a couple of days ago got rid of his Secretary of Defense Espers. And according to Politico, the reason they got rid of him is that Espers, the former defense secretary now, seemed to have been resistant to the White House efforts to send in troops to Portland or other areas of the country. So the defense secretary was against the White House, or pushed back against the White House efforts to send in troops to quell protesters or looting or whatever the heck they, at this point, whatever they're saying. If you have a guy like Cotton saying he's willing to send in troops to quell the uprising, and Donald Trump considered it, but then his former defense secretary, who Donald Trump got rid of a couple of days ago, was a little bit hesitant or was willing to push back. That, when you're talking about the Republican Party and the threat that it poses, or this autocratic authoritarian threat, that's it, man. In a democracy, can we see today Denmark rolling tanks across Copenhagen to crush dissent? No. A liberal democracy of rules and laws and judges, but that's not the plane these guys are creating. So I'm sorry. If you want to say anything about Espers, and if I just quickly add, Bill Barr, the current Attorney General, opened an investigation on electoral fraud, and I guess his main deputy in the Department of Justice, which, feel free to correct me if I got any of these details wrong, resigned in protest, and other figures. So, you got the legal part and you got the military part, it's just controlling the media. But go ahead.
It's one of those kinds of things where it's like, it's always the camel's nose under the tent, but the camel isn't in the tent yet.
Yeah.
And in the case of Barr's thing, it was, the deputy resigned because it seemed unnecessary to engage in it seems to be a performative effort to keep Trump happy. In fact, there was no authorization of investigation. It was authorization of U.S. attorneys to investigate if they feel like they need to, So it looked bad because even if there's a crime, there's a crime. Like, who do you need authorization for?
Right.
If we know, if there's credible evidence that there's 15,000 fraudulent votes out there, then yeah, I would expect the U.S. attorney to run up the flagpole to main justice, but going through the effort of releasing a statement saying, well, you can do this, even though you could have done it anyway.
Right.
Really just kind of, it says to me less, we're coming for the votes, than Donald Trump is a weenie and we have to salve his fragile ego. And is important because they shouldn't be doing that either. They shouldn't be sending these messages the public in that way, because it sends the wrong impression.
Was anybody outraged when they sent in U.S. troops to clear out the Washington, D.C. protests the day Donald Trump held a Bible upside down in front of a church? I mean, this isn't all in the mind of activists and liberals that this type of government is on a path towards, strongman authoritarianism in America. I mean, and there are other instances I could cite. I mean, it's, and by the way, if I should add that I think the Joint Chiefs of Staff regrets his role in that protest. So I'm glad that the military is sort of taking a stance. But another danger is when people refuse to recognize the results of the election, say it's massive amounts of fraud, and get to distribute that to tens of millions of people who voted for you. It's like, how many more data points of, this isn't, crossing the Rubicon, but you're getting closer.
And to be perfectly honest, that's the thing that's, I think, going to be the most, dangerous, because in the short to medium term, because
and what is that thing that you're talking about?
That being, the people not accepting the elections. I mean, the fact that you have this skepticism. I mean, 80% of Americans think that Joe Biden won. The problem is the other 20% are 60% of Republicans. I mean, these are not exact figures, but I mean, they're not, the real numbers aren't any more encouraging, and I think that represents, it goes back to that misinformation point we were discussing before, where you have people that are relying heavily on, false information, and they are relying on media sources that are deliberately misleading them, and they're deliberately misleading them for money. Like, I mean, I don't know what the real political, positions of anybody in the Fox News primetime lineup are. I think that they're vaguely similar to what they present themselves as, but at the end of the day, it's all about money for them.
Right.
You know, I mean, the books and treaties and merchandise and garbage that they put out or whatever. I mean, it all is crap. It doesn't. There's no value to it.
Yeah.
You're not going to learn anything by reading a Laura Ingraham book. But I mean, it's just the same warmed over pus that she spits every night. But they make money.
Right. Right.
And so I mean,
and it gets support online on social media. The more bombastic you are, the more likes you can get, the more subscribers you can get. You can build up your credibility online that way.
Exactly, and as I said, now to be fair, they haven't been doubting the election. They've been doubting it less and less as the days go by. But there's still enough doubt that's being sown in general that Trump has basically already said, and he's not the first Republican to say it. They just used to say it in much more subtle terms, but that I'll win a fair election. And that goes back to the notion of Republicans. Before they became as twisted as they are now, they still suffered from the twisted idea of, well, why would anybody vote against us, unless they are corrupt or
not American.
Not even just not American, not smart, not thinking properly. Mm-hmm. That is I mean, Mitt Romney seems like a moral person today, but this is still a man who had the 47% video, And unlike a lot of the other nonsense he said throughout the course of the campaign, I think he believed that one. At least he believed it at the time.
Yeah.
And that, and it goes right to the idea of,
no dissing Mitt Romney on Collateral Banter.
Okay. We love Mitt. Okay, Mitt, you're. I hope more Republicans are like him and they can fight for their values and policies. But it's interesting how Donald Trump's son likes to equate Mitt Romney as his favorite Democrat. So it's okay. Sorry.
But no. I mean, Mitt Romney has a moral compass in the way that some Republicans don't. But what I'm saying is that his view was fundamentally that, well, why would you ever consider not voting for a Republican unless there's something wrong with you?
Right.
Mm-hmm. And that is not that far away from Donald Trump saying, I'll only lose if the election is rigged.
Right.
Right. There's a natural path to that. And to be fair to Mitt Romney, it goes much earlier. I mean, Mitt Romney's been running for office for 400 years, but it predates his successful electoral runs. Let's put it that way.
Here's another concern that I had, and I've spoken out about this in other episodes that I've done. Is like, Donald Trump said a lot of things in 2016. Lock her up. She, Hillary Clinton was a criminal. Blah blah blah. Hillary Clinton broke the law. All of this stuff. And then he refused to accept the results of 2016 until it turned his favor. And he did essentially the same thing in 2020. I don't know if I'll accept it. I'll let you know if I will, if it goes in my favor. It's like the scary part for me is the American people don't reject this. Tens of millions of people said, you know what, that's my guy. And maybe they can overcome those type of conversations, but to me it says, well, if this guy Donald Trump is willing to violate these norms, well, why will the political class, why will future Republican candidates do it? Why would they follow no, I will accept the election results? It makes a guy like John McCain look like a relic of a Republican Party nobody recognizes anymore. A man who had the guts to stop a supporter from calling Obama, oh, he's a Muslim, he's a this. No, ma'am. And he grabs the mic. No, he's not any of that. He was willing to take on a person in front of him who is his supporter, who was calling the Democratic nominee at that time in 2008, Barack Obama, a Muslim, he's a blah, blah, blah. And he's willing to challenge and say, nope, he's a man I disagree with strongly, but he's a good American and a good man, And of course, the whole Muslim thing, it's not that the Muslim is a problem, but she was trying to use it as he's not American, he's a foreigner. Muslim is just, they are not meaning terms, So, I don't normally praise Republicans, or praise them on the show, but you kind of look back and say, you know what, America, I'm fascinated that those who had a moral compass, despite me not agreeing with many or most of their policies, you kind of have to respect the individual who is at least willing to, have some decency in politics, some level of respect. But you know what my problem is that gets me so fired up is that the American people don't reward that. That's the crazy part. And I'm thinking here of McCain, who ran in 2000 against Bush. I mean, I know he ran in 2008, but it's like the decent men, for some reason, especially in the Republican Party, like the half decent men. Joe Biden ran a decent campaign. He tried to run with this, I love everybody and the country needs to heal. We need to bring people together.
Unfortunately, it goes back to the fact that, for a large part, Americans have this perception of the country as something that it never was. It's something that, I guess you could kind of blame Ronald Reagan for this by trying to package it as some kind of nostalgia that just was painfully untrue. We've just never been able to get away from that. But I think that, it's like, it goes back to what I was saying before. It's like people don't understand really what it means to be free. They seem to think that, the fact that, the part that's most ridiculous about, a lot of the rights, argument, and I've heard this time and time again, and it's true if you look at the history, is when they gain power, they can't actually succeed because what they're promising people isn't possible for the most part, the Republicans are a good 20 or 30 years away from having a Supreme Court that would impose allow the kind of changes to the First Amendment law that would satisfy people who are upset about cultural issues. Or in a freedom of religion thing to limit, LGBTQ protections, although I think that's probably less likely now than it might have been before the election.
What do you think about ACA? It looked like even the Republican court won't strike that down. At least that was the initial reporting of it. The health care law, I should say to people in case they don't know what the ACA is, the Obamacare.
The court is a weird situation because, I have no faith in Kavanaugh or Gorsuch in one sense, because I do believe that they are principally partisan actors. Gorsuch is a little bit different. There's an old joke that, all of the Federal Society people are just, making up crap about textualism and originalism, just because they want to see conservative outcomes. But Gorsuch actually believes it, which is how you get like the opinion that was favoring, existing civil rights law protecting LGBTQ people. Mm-hmm. He actually believes in originalism, and he looked at the document and was like, well, it is what it is, So, that's going to result in some weird outcomes, just in the same way that Scalia, had some good votes on, civil
liberties, yes.
Civil liberties cases.
Yeah.
With Kavanaugh, it's kind of a different thing, but it's a little bit less ideological. I think that Kavanaugh might start turning a bit toward Roberts in the sense that we're not going to upset generally accepted legal principles to get what we want.
To argue this one is like, they passed the law, you struck down the individual mandate, you now are trying to say that the whole law goes kabooey, and it's like, how? It passed. It's not how it works. It's you got to go get 60 senators in the Senate to break the filibuster, and then you can go gut the law. I'm totally okay with it. Do it the democratic process like you've always told liberals to do. It's they got 60 votes. Obama used his capital to go get a health care law passed, and now you're trying to kill it by 1,000 cuts. And it's like, no, go build your own health care law, ram it through the Senate and the House, and then we govern with your law, okay? But you don't have 60 votes, so now you complain and you go to the Supreme Court, which they don't even have the House, nor do they even have the votes in the Senate. And it's like, guys, you gotta go implement your own health care law, okay? The democratic process and Obama's legislation, in my basic understanding, should just exist until something comes around that says, you know what? We now have the votes to turn this all around.
Exactly. The another way of looking at it was, I don't know if people remember this, I think it was 2014, 2015, there was another healthcare case This was about whether or not the individual exchanges, when the federal government set them up, should be allowed. And Roberts had again been on the side of keeping the law up. Kennedy actually joined that time. I remember somebody did a tweet that said, shorter John Roberts, I'm a conservative, not a nut. Because it would have required a truly ridiculous reading of generally accepted judicial principles that are used everywhere in this country in order to get the kind of result that Republicans really wanted. And I think that that's going to start to be, and the reason why Roberts, even if you assume Roberts is an entirely partisan actor, and I don't think that that's wrong, I just don't think that that's all, correct either. Roberts understands that if the court does not have the respect as an institution, then their rulings don't mean anything. We've had periods, and I said this to people 4 years ago when Trump won. I was like, I worry less about the court going wild. I mean, there's some things that are going to happen. We know they're going to try to gut unions. We know they're going to go after Roe versus Wade. But how far are they really going to go before people are like, I don't care what they think. I mean, like I don't want to. I can't say this as an attorney and officer of the court, I suppose, but there's a part of me that thinks if we had 5-4 decisions with Amy COVID Barrett as the fifth vote that were like devastating, and I mean like really, really bad, like beyond the hot button issues that we're talking about. Do we as citizens have an obligation to follow that? Mm. I'm not sure. And that's the thing that Roberts is worried about, and he should be worried about it, because the court's credibility is not something that just exists. It has to have buy-in from everybody, and if it doesn't, then it will start to crumble, and people will start ignoring it, and then we have chaos. But that's the way it goes.
Yeah. So we got to wrap up here, Matt. Tell us what the latest is that's going on with Western Mass politics and insight in terms of local politics in this area, in Hampden County, in Springfield, Holyoke. What big story are you following recently? I saw something that Aaron Vega was appointed to the economic development position in Holyoke. What other big stories are you following?
Well, that's going to be a big one because there's obviously constant questions about whether or not Holyoke Mayor Alex Morris is going to seek another 4-year term. I'd say the better money is that he's not going to, and because if he does want to run for Congress again, it's going to look really bad to run for another 4-year term and then turn right around and try to run for Congress again. Right. But I think that there's been long talk that this was going to be his last term anyway. I mean, he'll have been there for 10 years, serving out his office. Yeah. So that's going to be something that we're going to start watching in the next few weeks. Also in Springfield, Springfield doesn't have a mayoral race next year, but because we have 2 city councilors that won legislative seats, their seats are expected to open next year in the regularly scheduled election. We already have some people registering to run for Orlando Ramos' seat, and some more names are in the mix. So we'll be seeing that race develop. Nice. That's really the only big, things that are like dominating right now. I mean, a lot of politics feels really frozen because of the coronavirus outbreak. Sure. Now that there isn't, an election that everybody's focused on nationally, to a lesser extent, the Georgia races, but there's really not much anybody can do. I think a lot of people are going to be reluctant to try to plan for the whole cycle to be the way this cycle was, all remote. I think some people are going to hold out some hope that some normality will come back by the time people actually are voting next year. Right. And we'll just have to wait and see.
We are a bit of a holding because of COVID. The country is sort of at a standstill until we can overcome that with vaccines, and begin to distribute that and really get the details of who gets it first, at what pace, how they'll control the narrative of that, because you can imagine when 1 or 2 people get sick, it's going to spread like wildfire on social media that the vaccine is really a great plot to enslave humanity or something like that. So I'm positive that will happen. But all right, thanks, Matt Szafranski from Western Mass Politics and Insight here on Collateral Banter, episode 79. Thank you for coming on, Matt. Appreciate it, for giving your insight on what is going on politically. Donald Trump lost this race it seems like they're now calling all of the states, so declare it right here. Donald Trump won 232 electoral college votes, and Joe Biden won 306. That is what I'm seeing right now on CNN, which, if that is true, and that holds up, because Georgia's doing a recount and other states might be doing a recount, Biden won 306, which is the exact number of electoral college votes that Donald Trump won back in 2016, if I'm not mistaken. So I appreciate you coming on, Matt.